Hello everyone, and welcome to the Instrumentation sync on Tuesday, 16th of April. It's a new milestone. And so, as always, I want to just quickly go through the milestone, what our priorities are, and also discuss if there's any questions or anything's unclear. I'm going to quickly share my screen since Tanuja is not here today. It's, I think, 5 in the morning in Australia. I'm going to cover all of it today. And you see the milestone planning issue?
Yep.
All right. We're in 17.0 now. And so it's another major release. And we're also at the verge of the end of Q1. So officially Q1 goes until the 8th of April, or our financial year 25 Q1 goes until the end of April. So the main focus is going to be the pending items from the Q1 OKRs, and then any other high priority issues or bugs. Carrying over from these Q1 OKRs, the trustworthy ingestion pipeline monitoring is still very important. That's something that Mihao and Nico are working on. So this is just creating visualizations or monitoring for our ingestion pipeline for product analytics to support them in going GA. So just as a reminder, product analytics is going generally available as a bring your own cluster solution at the end of or with this milestone. And then in Q2, the idea is to go to QA with a managed solution. Like GA, sorry. Generally available. Too many abbreviations. The other big focus is going to be to finishing up the migration of total counts to internal events. Part of that is allowing to filter by additional properties in service ping, because that allows us to keep the number of individual events low and actually remove some of the kind of micro frameworks that are used in some of these cases for some of the groups where it's very similar events being triggered by string concatenation. So that's something we want to remove. There's a bunch of them conversions that are already being worked on. There's a bunch more that we will want to work on in 17.0. Anytime if you want to do an issue that's more straightforward in the sense of it's very clear of what we need to do, then please feel free to pick up one of those up. Again, it's really good if we can get those done. And we're still aiming for getting all of them done by the end of the quarter. That's going to be a stretch, to be honest. But the further we can get, the better, because we're getting closer to actually removing this completely. And that's going to be a big help to us if we can get rid of Redis counts in general. Just going to remove a lot of confusion and additional code that's no longer needed. We have some leftover work around passing into additional properties, especially around the documentation and the generator. And then we still want to focus on making testing better. The latest feedback on testing hasn't been too bad already, but we also identified some potential improvements, I think, on the back end. So I was going to speak to them later. On the front end also, Ankit already proposed some things and is working on them. So regardless of the current state of feedback, I think we can make things even better by the end of the quarter. The main
I have a question. I forgot how it is. So we have the quarter ending at the end of the month, but the milestone ending kind of mid-May.
Yep.
how does that impact how we prioritize stuff during this milestone?
So it means that the highest importance overall, or kind of the most we can contribute to the OKRs, is mainly the Redis count conversions and making sure we get those done. The testing scores is the second priority. The fact is that most likely, even if we get something merged now, it's not gonna improve testing scores right now already, because like people then also need to use it and so on. But I don't see any, like, we're not pursuing OKRs for the OKR's sake, right? And for just having pretty numbers at the end of the month. So if it means kind of abandoning work that we're in the middle of, as is the case with, for example, the testing things, and then switching, for example, to a migration issue, just for the sake of getting the number a bit higher 1 day earlier or 2 days, that's not something I think that we should do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's mostly focusing on like the results for the milestone and not worry too much about the like exactly what is done at the end of the month.
Yeah. And if it's like, I mean, ideally we want to have as much done as possible by the end of the month, which is the end of the quarter. But again, I mean, if it's then like if a migration issue gets merged 2 days later, some of these things are also not in our control and so on. It's yeah, we don't want to make a cult out of it, right?
All right.
All right. So the main new thing feature-wise is the missing connection between metric, event, and feature that it is tracking. I think Tanuja also referred to that in a sync a few weeks back. That's something that we want to definitely introduce, because next quarter there is going to be a big focus across a lot of teams or a lot of stages to improve instrumentation coverage. And while that's going to start with add X% of instrumentation based on best information within your stage, in the long run, we want, or as soon as possible, we want to create a more clear single source of truth around what actually is instrumentation coverage. And for calculating a coverage, we need to calculate, okay, what is even, like, we need to have a target, right? And to give it an actual percentage. And so far, the best idea that's also already been used, for example, by customer success in the form of Excel sheets, is to map features to metrics or events, to have a clear mapping of, okay, if a customer asks me, how well am I doing, like how much am I using a certain feature, I can look at this specific metric, I can look at this specific event. And what we want to do is to create that currently missing link, so that we're able to create automatic dashboards, automatic reports around, okay, how many of the features that are being created or that we have in GitLab have instrumentation. And there is a features YAML file which lists most of the features. It might not be 100% the best kind of way of showcasing features, as in features that can be tracked, but it's the best source that we could find so far. If you have any other ideas or generally kind of feedback there, feel free to contribute in the issue. Like, happy about any feedback, but that's the best guess we have so far. And so that's something that we want to create. It shouldn't be too much work, just to make sure this is only going to be focused on creating the possibility to create that mapping. It's not going to be actually going through all the metrics and looking at, okay, which features do they correspond to. That's going to be something that then the teams also have to cover, that whatever features they create or are assigned to a certain group, they need to make sure that the correct metrics are assigned to it. Yeah. The other things are also relevant for OKRs. Again, migration the total counts and removing duplicate radius HTML events. This looks like quite a few, but I've been working on making the removal process easier. We're already at the point where it shouldn't require any additional notifications anymore to other teams. The only thing that's left is that there's a few, we need to figure out if we can automatically query Tableau for the usage of a certain metric, or otherwise just inform the teams. This is mostly going to be busy work of removing one metric in the favor of another and adding some documentation that, okay, this metric has been removed. There's this other metric you should look at instead. Any questions to the feature work for 17.0? I know it's a lot of migration stuff, but we need to get through this to actually be able to remove something. And I think as a team, if everyone picks up one of those issues along the way in 17.0, then I think it should be fine. We have a bunch of carryover also from maintenance, removing aggregated metric, which is also a big step of making things easier to understand and having less solutions that are doing the same thing or are close to doing the same thing. Removing product section and product stage from the YAML files because they're no longer needed. Updating gems, allowing vector to be scaled up and down.
I think the third one there, get rid of unused. That issue is already closed, so I think we can just remove that.
That was done in the meantime. Yeah, thanks.
Easy.
Yeah, check.
Can you do that for a bunch more?
Yeah. Don't worry, I'll just close them. Don't worry, no problem.
That sounds like a good idea. New maintenance work, some small work on the .NET SDK to bring that up to speed with the other SDKs or up to the same level. We can remove the referrer from version check, which is just potentially creating privacy concerns, because when an instance is doing a version check, it's still sending the referrer along, although that's not being used anywhere. So it's exposing data that's not actually being stored or needed. And we want to update the event definitions if we can get to it to valid product groups. We've already done that to metrics. Event definitions are less, but it's still a lot of busy work of going through existing YAML files. But it would be nice to have everything up to date. And then we have a bunch of bugs. We still have the missing service pings for version smaller than 12.0. This is something that we've identified. It has to do with an expired certificate. We just don't know why we have an expired certificate on version.gitlab.com, in addition to a bunch of correct certificates. And so version smaller or equal to 12.0 just uses an old OpenSSL, which leads to it being confused by the expired certificate. So we need to get rid of the certificate. We're talking to the other teams on how that could work. The other two are triggering an internal event without an associated metric. Associated metric leads to an error. That's not behavior we want, because that doesn't allow people to actually just decide on just sending events if they're only interested in what GitLab.com does. And we recently had an incident with snowplow events being wrongly labeled. Fortunately, those snowplow events have been preserved as bad events. We just need to figure out how to get them, the ones that were wrongly labeled as bad, into the right format so that they can be used as good events again, because this is like 3 days of events, so we don't want to lose it completely. Anything missing? Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Sure.
How realistic is stopping support for versions less than 12? Because it creates problems like this from time to time, and it's responsible for some of technical debt in version GitLab.com, I think. So we might want to start discussion around that if it's like viable from business standpoint.
So if there's actually technical debt in version that we are kind of maintaining right now because of 12.0 and less, then I think it's viable to actually have that discussion. I mean, we were close to abandoning this bug as well, because we had the already the confirmation from the data team that these GitLab instances, as to be expected, are responsible for a very small amount of ARR. They are still responsible for some, so there's actually people running 12.0 and less, which I don't even know how many years ago that is. Yeah, so actually 12.0 or less within and paying money, but it's like very small considering the overall size of GitLab. So we can, in theory, drop the support. We just continued the investigation because at that point, when we were close to dropping it, we actually figured out what's going on. And now it's more up to other teams to figure out like why is there this certificate. So definitely, if there's other things, feel free to set up an issue with these other things we could get rid of if we just dropped support of 12.0, and then we can ask the data team again for confirmation that it's going to be actually fine to just drop it. But it should work if we have enough reason to.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'll go through version up and see how much of a benefit that would be.
Cool. Anything else? All right. If not, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. The next one is mostly an FYI. I think I've already mentioned that a bunch of times now, that there's a working group ongoing about the product usage data architecture, coordinating with other teams that are working on our analytics or product usage data use cases, and trying to think about how we can simplify the structure overall in GitLab. So that concerns things like product analytics, observability, the optimized team, value stream analytics, and those kinds of things. I just want to mention it again that everyone is free to follow along. There's a public agenda, there's recordings. It is quite interesting. One thing that's important is that nothing is set in stone yet, because I've already been asked that if there's like any outcomes, because there are diagrams and so on that show potential future states. But those are all just potential future states. As of this moment, the working group, if you go into the documentation for it, it has a bunch of exit criteria. The first ones are around documenting the current state, just getting an overview of all teams that are working somehow in this area and the architecture that they're using. There's another exit criteria that's around coming up with a future goal of where we want, like how the architecture should look like in the future, how much of it should be unified, how much of it should be separate from each other, and why. Again, there's ideas around that, but that's not finalized yet. Currently, the working group end date is set to be the end of July. Hopefully, potentially, we have some outcomes earlier than that. But yeah, any diagram you see, anything like that, please don't be confused about that being maybe yeah, the new state or something like that, especially because there's spin diagrams. There's been some back and forth together with Sid around potential future state as well, and his ideas and so on. But also there, this is considered as a work in progress not something that we're going to go and implement right now. I just want to make sure that that's clear. Next, we have a point from, or is there any questions regarding the working group? Anything now? Okay. So yeah, at this point, please don't feel obligated to follow along because it can be daunting, but at the same time, you're free to. It's completely open. If there's anything that actually affects us, I'll hopefully remember to share, but I think I'll do that. Yeah, then the next item is from Radovan, but I think I can answer that in the thread or in the issue synchronously. We don't need to go through it right now because he's not here. And then it's to you, Piotr.
Mine is more of a FYI as well, because I think we don't really stick to the event name format that we set ourselves as one true and only, and I also named a few events wrong, and people don't seem to care that much. I guess it's not a big deal if we don't follow it very strictly, but it would help with searchability, I feel. And just a FYI to think twice when you're naming an event. It sometimes can if you don't use the CLI and just copy paste a event definition, that might be a that might prompt you to make a mistake, because when you use the CLI, you have the reminder of the event name structure and so on. But yeah, just please take care.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just also keep in mind, I think, as Piotr said, it's also not something that we need to follow religiously if there's a good reason not to follow it. So I've had it like 1 or 2 times where there was like an existing event name schema within a domain, or within someone was kind of naming events very similarly within a very contained part of the code base. And then it also makes sense to kind of preserve that already existing schema within their part. But definitely if it's new events, if there's not a connection to anything pre-existing, I think we should aim for following that. All right, I have one more FYI as part of the show and tell. I think I've said it already in the beginning. Removals, so marking a metric as removed, is no longer going to require a notifying external teams by default. So far, it was always needed to tag the CS teams and data teams to make sure that that no metric that could be important is removed. We have the confirmation now that all health indicator metrics and other performance indicators are marked correctly, and that it's part of workflows on their side to, if, for example, a metric starts being used in gain side, that it's also getting marked and an MR gets created within the code base to mark it appropriately. So any metric that's not a performance indicator type of any type we should be able to just mark as removed. The only thing to still keep in mind is if we, for example, remove a metric from any other team, we should still notify the PM and EM of that other team that we're removing a metric for them. If it's just a metric that is used within a team, then it's fine completely to just mark it as removed yourself.
Okay. I think everyone in the call currently has already at least like looked at some of the backend internal event testing stuff. To recap for anyone watching the video later, I have 3 MRs up that represent 3 different approaches for like having composable assertions for internal events so that a single test can cover like multiple different events, metrics, and different like quantities of them, which should accommodate a few more use cases and be more universally applicable across the backend testing suite, and can also be used from feature tests to like track that like a front end like UI action will still update a metric, which I don't think we have a way to do right now. So the 3 approaches that are in the draft MRs are just different technical approaches, functionally not particularly different, but we need to just pick one to move forward. The sentiments so far have been that one of them is very readable, one of them is quite idiomatic and like self-contained, and the last one is readable and intentional but has some performance concerns. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Can you maybe share your screen and kind of quickly just show
okay.
either one of them together with the sentiments? And Bertrand and Jonas can make appropriate faces to what they think about.
So this is kind of each of the MRs has this little table of how it works, what the caveats are to the approach, and an example of what the assertions would look like. So the last one here would basically operate by pre-loading the entire service ping payload and using that as like a reference point. The second one is like pretty self-contained, but requires like the assertion to be passed in through a block. And then the first one is just helper methods, but they would work by basically collecting all of the events and metrics we want to check, checking their value before, and then inserting extra logic after the example is run to make sure that they were incremented correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the third one is pretty much disqualified because of the performance issues, I think. So it's really a choice between 1 and 2.
I would mostly agree with that.
Would it be like, is it strictly necessary to compute the whole service ping payload in advance?
So that's actually a good question of like, I think it would be valuable if whatever approach we take can work for database metrics or system metrics as well, because we do access them like in roughly the same way from the service ping. There's really not much reason that we couldn't take this same approach from the specs. It doesn't mean we have to. Like, you're totally right there.
Yeah, but I'm more thinking, so in the like, if you look at it like from the usage point of like, yeah, from the like how you use it in the code, like internal event, it's pretty different from defining from using a database metric.
Like in the app code?
Yeah. So it's
Mm-hmm.
right. You don't really define at any point in the app code. Oh, I want a database metric here.
Oh,
Right. You defined.
I don't know that I agree with that, actually.
Okay.
Because there are plenty of places where like we have a database metric that we would want to make sure is updated based on whatever action is actually changing the state of the database. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It doesn't make sense, but in the case, if you scroll down where you have the so in the third example here, if we use the
So I do have a sort of draft-ish approach locally that like combines 1 and 3 and basically would give us a syntax of something like this. But I honestly think that it gets messier and like more likely to be leaky and broken. And that makes me nervous.
So what would so what are the benefits of splitting it out in kind of 3 different ways?
Like these 3 approaches?
No, the like the one you just showed.
This.
Yeah, where you have 3 different expect methods.
Oh, well, it's actually just 2.
Oh, it's actually 2.
I
Okay.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically, so if we look at this like third approach here, it's really similar in that there's this internal event and usage metric like helper. But it would, by having them be like a function here, it would allow us to basically provide better error messages to engineers to make sure that they're calling things in the right way from the right places and including the right modules. Because that is one concern I broadly have of the more stuff we require engineers to include and know to add, the harder it is.
Yeah. Should we spend a couple of minutes on the performance concerns about the third option? I'm just trying to understand why.
Okay, so
why
even
it's
if
kind of
we
why
if
it's
we sorry.
I'm just kind of wondering why it is required that we compute the entire service ping for that approach.
Okay.
And
so
maybe we could kind of put some limitations in, so we don't need to do that. If this is kind of the preferred way, if we could get rid of the performance issue.
So if we did just exclude any of the database or system metrics, we're saying this is exclusive to internal events based metrics. For this like order to work of we call the the thing first and say, okay, we expect these values to have been updated. We still need to, before this is called, check all of the values we might potentially want to check here. Because we don't know which ones we are going to reference until we've referenced them, which is one of the reasons that like this first option can work the way it does, that we don't have to compute everything or read all of the Redis events, because that is not a zero cost like operation either. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It gets kind of hacky if you want to get around that. Or kind of a weird.
Yeah. And so something that I feel pretty strongly about is testing outcomes and not necessarily just method calls. Because I think that's a big part of where, especially in our domain of like events and instrumentation, things fall apart. I think feature level and like full flow sort of tests are going to protect us and the engineers more, which is one of the reasons that I would really like for all of the metric tests to read from the service ping or like directly the data that we're like reading from Redis. Because I think that's one of the things that makes each of these approaches like a little leakier in 1 and 3. Because yeah, it's not based on some method getting called in the code base.
I kind of I agree with this, that it's good to kind of the broader, the deeper we test that kind of but it is also a little bit against how some of the tests are done. Like we do kind of stop out a few things, and I wonder if like would it be, so it might like if we then decide, okay, we will do like full-blown integration test every time, it might impact the execution time of the spec by of the pipelines by quite a bit. I don't know how much. No clue. Of course, like, but even if we did if we only did it for internal events and did it like put data in Redis, read the data again, do the aggregates and all this, that would still be quite a more like compared to a fully stopped unit test, that would be significantly slower if we start doing that. Is that okay? Like, should we be worried about that?
I am not sure I entirely understand.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. So let's say somebody did a controller and they want to test the logic of the controller, and well it's in the Rails stack, so they're kind of stopping out the lower layers. They're just testing the controller in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And then they add a shared example,
Mm-hmm.
saying or start using some of our matches. And now the kind of the stopped unit test that they were implementing, which could run like super quick, now start doing calls to external services like Redis. I think for me as the developer who's writing the original control test, that would be unexpected. I would be like, that seems a little what do you call it? Like the
Yeah,
heavy machinery, like
so I get what you mean, like broadly of like having shared examples that are going to get included all over the place that aren't performant is a problem because it has unintended like performance impacts in a quite like sweeping way.
Yeah.
I don't know that like checking Redis is in that category. Like one of the reasons we have it in use is because it is much quicker.
Yeah, I wonder if it's worth doing a little
some performance analysis,
like a little analysis on like how what if we did something like this, and instead of checking that a method gets called with certain arguments, we kind of track it all the way to Redis and read the values back, how that would work. I think it's still like we still want to offer the integration way of doing it, because definitely it's much more thorough. Yeah,
I think it's a balance of if there are things that just making sure that it's called with the right arguments is sufficient, great. But there are things where it's not. And I actually think that like tracking or testing that metric got incremented when we expected it to can be really important and helpful for especially like user-based or project-based metrics, because if they're getting like triggered with the valid arguments, it doesn't necessarily mean that the metric got incremented when it was supposed to.
Right. And I think also like when we start adding filters and more complicated ways to define metrics, it gets even more.
Yeah.
I also completely agree that there could be easy misconceptions by developers on how the connection between an event and metric actually works like. And this seems like a good way to, like a good tool to give to developers to verify that it works the way that they expect it to, and that to also communicate it that. So my expectation is, okay, I increase this event and this one or multiple metrics get affected.
Would it be an option to do it in memory, like kind of do what do you call it, like a mock implementation? That might be a little too much. I don't know.
Of what?
Basically like remove Redis, like not like keep it in memory, like do the keep the events in memory and compute the metrics based on that. But that might be just be an optimization down the road if we see that the this is causing too much. We're spending too many cloud credits running pipelines because we do all this Redis communication. Yeah, no, but that's something we can change. Yeah.
And I can definitely look into doing a little performance analysis on like a small scale, see if we can get an idea of what kind of impact it would have even just now. But I think we should probably just move forward with one of these approaches to at least like the syntax and data flow, just because we won't really know until we've got stuff in there. I know I personally like number 2, but it kind of seemed like, Jonas, maybe you didn't love this. Is there anything that
I think for me, it's mostly that it gets. I think like an example like you have here, it just gets a little. I think it gets kind of hard to read. Pretty quick, but
because you'd expect the subject to be bigger, or but the example, like looking at the example directly, to me personally, that current example doesn't seem too hard.
No, but I mean, we always have like 3 metrics. Almost always have 3 metrics defined, and so that would be kind of a.
Okay, but isn't that just as a first of all, I think that's something where we also could say, okay, it's fine to just do one. And it can also be an optimization on our level of. I think that's something we also talked about at some point. Is in theory, we could get to a point where, for example, it's not. So if you talk about 3 metrics, I assume the different time frames and so on. That this could theoretically be considered one metric and just dimensions on top of it, like the 7 days and 28 days at least.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a different way of looking at it. And I think in any case, like any one of the solutions, you'd have to add additional lines for additional metrics, right? If you want to test 3 metrics, it's going to be 3 lines.
Yeah. In this case, would it be an option just to have a method that takes a list of. I mean, that if that's pretty common, so the increment users metrics could take a list of.
That's a great idea. I think this version might also accept a
it could be already
multiple events.
Yeah, okay, cool.
So yeah, it can accept multiple metrics
but
too.
I don't have strong opinions about it. I think if it's way easier for us to, like, if there's less like if it's just easier to get off the ground, I think it's a good way to go, for sure.
Okay.
Just as someone who's not working that much with RSpec, but also knows of like previous shared examples and so on, I think all of those solutions, that one included, is a big step forward in making clear what we're actually testing and kind of making it easier to get the tests to a point where they actually verify the behavior that they provide this additional value of, okay, I'm not just going to add a line so that I added a line, which it sometimes feels like, so that I have test coverage, but rather really help with showing the intention of what did I want, what behavior did I want, and does that behavior actually happen? Yeah. So I'm also totally like from what I've heard now, it also sounds like version 2, apart from potential readability concerns, seems like the otherwise the easiest, less leaky and so on solution. So since the readability is really not that much different, I'd also be much in favor of just going that route.
There could we, so in the example here, you have these kind of, the trigger internal event is called one time, so times one, and the increment by one, could that be default? Or
Yeah.
should we kind of, okay.
I just kind of wanted to give the
Yeah.
example of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that we could.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Yeah, I think that would be.
I
think
actually
that's
have
cool.
in my local stuff that I was experimenting with, I have a pretty convenient way that we can just like tack all of the like once, twice, at least 3 or whatever like RSpec matchers on to the end of like trigger internal event.
Cool.
So I think that would be nice. Yeah.
and this would be composable with other matches also, or what? So
like
you could
change and add a system note.
Yeah,
so
all
we
right.
can dedupe some of our executions too.
Yeah. I think that's a good argument for sure.
Okay.
Awesome. You convinced me.
Calling it too.
Yeah.
We have a decision. We have a winner.
Yes.
we made it 1 minute before I think we should end this meeting. Right on time. Cool. But I really feel like this is even though there was already good feedback on our testing as it is right now, I think this definitely still seems like a big step forward to me, to making sure that we have good ways of testing these kinds of things before they actually make it into production, and increase the chance that whatever people then see and happens in the service ping metrics and that this actually represents what they want. So kudos to that. Cool.
Super.
All right. Then thanks everyone for taking that long to the sync, but I think it's definitely worth it. And have a nice rest of your day or evening, night. See ya.
Yeah.